day 2, we are delighted to welcome Ed Luce, the U.S. national editor and columnist at the Financial Times, who joins us in dialogue with Thierry Breton, the European Commissioner for the Internal Market, here to discuss reimagining post-pandemic economic resilience.
Thanks so much for that. It's a great pleasure to host this opening session to your second day of this very important conference. And it's a great pleasure in particular to be here with Thierry Breton, the EU Internal Markets Commissioner, which for those of you who aren't as familiar as you might be with the workings of Brussels is a bit like being head of the FTC, the competitive competition arm of the DOJ, parts of the Treasury, parts of the SEC. It's a very important role, in other words, and particularly in the context of these big issues that the Biden administration wants to address transatlantically: competition policy, resiliency post-COVID, global supply chains, China, and so forth. Monsieur Breton was a former French finance minister, a former chief executive of France Telecom. So a lot of experience both in the private sector and in government. Let me start, though, Monsieur Breton, being a journalist, with the news of the last 24 hours, which is the Biden administration's, to some people, quite surprisingly emphatic decision to announce that it was going to seek waivers on the patents for COVID vaccines, to have a TRIPS waiver. Now, of course, that's got to command consensus at the WTO. And the position of European countries in the EU, I believe, is still in favor of retaining patents. Are you going to work with Biden and Catherine Tai, the US Trade Representative, to get these waivers through the WTO quickly?
So thank you very much. And first of all, good morning to everyone. And I'm extremely happy to be with you. I'm dying to come in the US back because I miss my trips there. But hopefully very soon we'll be able to do this live and on one side or the other one of the ocean. But still, that's a very important question. We have been always clear, and I have been personally, as you know, I'm also in charge of the vaccine because I've been tasked early February to be the head of EU task force for vaccine, a little bit with my counterpart, you know, in the US. This is the same position, more or less, than the one that Jeff Zients hold in this topic. So I have been always extremely clear. First, it was a matter of science. And it's unbelievable, but we have been able to develop vaccines which are working in few months. By the way, I just would like to say that it is a cooperation between Europe and the US. Most of the vaccines which are working today has been developed and financed thanks to European research, Tech BioNTech, Tech CureVac, Tech Oxford, Tech Janssen. They're all European labs, European researchers. And the good thing is that they're working. But then, of course, thanks to the BARDA, the US has been able to put a lot of money and help to accelerate the rollout, the development and rollout of this European research. And that's very good because this is a cooperation, definitely. And people don't understand that, but it is a cooperation between EU and the US. And by the way, this cooperation between EU and the US will be the one, I believe personally, which will help us, how should I phrase it? Yes, to save the world. So the second phase now was to increase the capacity, the production of the vaccine. And this has been a very difficult task. I'm monitoring myself with my team, the task force, 53 factories in Europe, are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make sure that we can ramp up. By the way, we are today probably the first continent. We produce a bit more vaccines than in the US, but it's good. But we had a different politics, and I don't want to again to discuss anything. And I understand everyone. In the US, the administration established an executive order to say that until the herd immunity will not be reached in the US, not one single dose will leave the US. And I can understand that. Our philosophy was to do it for us, but also to help the world. And we have been producing both for us and half of our production for the rest of the world. In other words, all our allies, all the NATO allies, we do it. All Israel, we do it. All Japan, we do it. Canada, we do it. Mexico, we do it. So in other words, this was our philosophy. And by the way, I said many times to my friends in the US, look, as soon as you can, it will be good that we do it, both of us. But so far, we are still the only one. But now I was clear to answer to your question to say, look, when we will have enough ramp up to make sure that we will be able to have the facilities and the supply chain and the global supply chains working globally in order to be able to sustain the facilities, it will be time to open the discussion of the patents. Because, you know, we are now entering into a new phase. Probably we will reach herd immunity at the same time, more or less, in the US and in Europe, probably during the summer. But both of us, we represent only 10% of the planet's population. So we need to sit very quickly. And now I always said that when we will reach this, it will be time immediately to see first how to accelerate the rollout with existing vaccines. Because, you know, to make a factory, starting from scratch, when you give a patent, and then to have the first vaccines to be ready, it's, let's say, many months, probably 1 year or 1 year and a half. So it means that it's time now to think how, with our production, we can immediately increase drastically the help and support for all other countries, like Europe is doing now, but we don't want to be alone here, including through COVAX or other tools. And then, of course, to start to discuss for the next phase, which will be how to accelerate this for the world with this proposal that is coming now at the right time for the waiver of the patent, because we know then that it will take probably another year or so to build the facility. But in between, who will bridge? Europe, and hopefully soon US with it.
And that's accepted. And I think people understand that Europe's sent as many doses outside of Europe as it has put into European arms inside of Europe. But let me just understand your answer. Clearly, this TRIPS waiver that the Biden administration now supports is only going to be effective for precisely the reasons you set out. It takes a year or so to build a plant and to transfer the technology. It's only going to be effective if it's done and agreed at the WTO at very high speed, regardless of the complexities. Are you?
Edward, no, that's a very good question. It's important to sit now. It's important also to realize for everyone that was listening to us that these patents are mainly European patents. This is maybe why you heard and not elsewhere. Maybe you heard some noise. But at the end of the day, I really think that now it is the time to sit together and to discuss this and to go into your direction, yes, quickly. You know, and I'm always was consistent and always said, when we will make sure, we will be certain that our productions will be able to reach the level that we need. For example, for us in Europe, we will be probably between 3 to 4 billion doses capacity at the end of this year. 3 to 4 billion doses, which makes, of course, that now we know that we have been able to reach this without destabilizing the ramp up and the supply chain. So now I could tell you, yes, the supply chain now are solid. The ramp up is effective. So yes, it is the time to do it. And personally, I think we will. It will be good to do it quickly. But as I said always, everything at a time.
No, okay, that's clear now. I want to move beyond vaccines in a second, but let me just very quickly ask you, what went wrong at the early stages of the procurement negotiations by Brussels? Because you were later than America and Britain, and that did cause a lot of controversy. What went wrong? How did Brussels mishandle this?
Personally, I should say to you one thing: the contract with AstraZeneca. Everything went extremely well. We signed the contract with AstraZeneca, Oxford. Let me start even more. At the beginning, Oxford research scientists have been able to produce adenovirus vaccines, and they wanted to get, let's say, married, if I may say so, with Merck, the vaccine company, because of course no one. It's interesting, by the way, when to understand my answer. Not one single company today working was a big pharma. BioNTech was a German company. They had to select somebody knowing how to manufacture vaccines. They selected Pfizer using this European technology. Same thing for CureVac. Same thing for Janssen, which is a Netherlands company, and then of course linked and bought by G&G to produce it. Same thing for AstraZeneca. I mean, Oxford selected Merck first, and then the British government decided that they wanted to have AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca, as you know, had its headquarters in London. That may be one of the reasons, or maybe the reason. Unfortunately, AstraZeneca had no expertise in vaccines. But still, so we signed the contract a little bit before the UK, and we signed for 120 million doses for Q1 2021, and 180 million doses for Q2. And unfortunately, for reasons we are investigating now, AstraZeneca delivered only 25%, 30 million in Q1, while we understand that it delivers everything for the UK, and for Q2, 70 million instead of 180. So we had to correct this very quickly, and we did it with my team, and of course with the support of the companies, because all others, name it, of course, BioNTech and Pfizer, Moderna too, over-deliver, worked extremely hard. And now we are exactly at the same speed as the US. We are catching up. But of course, if AstraZeneca had delivered the way they delivered for the UK, which was planned, we will be probably. I hate to compare us. You know, this has no signification. In French, we call it the fable le lièvre et la tortue. You know, you start slow or you start quickly. At the end of the day, what is important is that we will land probably exactly at the same speed that others, maybe a little bit more advanced. But this is what went wrong. And then, of course, we organize also ourselves to help all industrial companies, and it was part of my duty to make sure that the supply chains were working well. To give you an example, we had with the executive order which has been put in place by the US administration. It was difficult, if not forbidden, including to send some components. And you know, to make a vaccine, you have 400 to 500 components. So I had to engage also to make sure that supply chains were working. We had a lot of delays because of this ban, but thanks to the good willingness that we have been able to establish, finally it comes smoothly. And now, of course, we are catching up, but we are, I believe, exactly at the same speed as others, including by the US, our US friend, which is good again. Huh?
Okay, well, so the many components of the supply chain to produce vaccines is a very good sort of dropping off point to get into the larger topic of resiliency in global supply chains post-pandemic, which I know is one of your focuses and of the focus of this discussion. Not just vaccines, semiconductors, which we've been seeing shortages of in the last few months, causing all kinds of downstream complications in the car industry and elsewhere. Europe, I believe, only has 10-12% of global semiconductor production. In order to be resilient or have strategic autonomy, you're going to need a much higher share than 10-12% of what Intel or what the Taiwanese produce. How are you going to do that without throwing massive subsidies at them and opening yourself up to charges of protectionism?
That's a very good question. You know, it's interesting because last week I was here in Brussels with one of my old friends, the CEO of Intel, Pat Getzinger. Yeah. And I invited him, so we spent the day, last Friday here in Brussels to discuss, of course, strategy and so on. So that's interesting because we are comparing our strategy. Could you imagine that 25 years ago, we were building in Europe 40 to 45% of the global world production needs in semiconductors. And now we are exactly at 9%. The US were a little bit less, and now the US are at 11%. So both of us, we are 9% in the EU, 11% in the US, roughly same thing, 10-10. And we said that in our strategy in the EU, our goal is to go back to 20%. We believe it is our fair share in the next 10 years. And we compared the strategy of the US is to go from 10% now to 30%. So roughly, we are here in parallel regarding our weight in the global economy. Of course, we recognize that there is this CHIP Act in the US with 50 billion of public money, which will be put, of course, for American companies in the US. And I think it's very important because you need to invest a lot. So for us, we will act with some of course of our plans, the next generation EU, that we insisted to have what we create we call an alliance between semiconductors. So the alliance will be between the European semiconductors. Then we are defining now our strategy. In other words, to go roughly to be able to produce, and the specialist will follow me hopefully between let's say 22 to 10 nanometers within the next few years, including with manufacturing sites. We have already, but we want to increase manufacturing sites to go now. We are roughly in average at between 20 to 30, so 22 to 10, and to discuss together, to invite a partner. So we are discussing now, of course, to be open, but of course at our condition, like in the US, we are an open continent, but now we establish our condition, and then we will invite the one who will be able to benefit, or we are willing to benefit from our market at our condition. And we have not too many players. So we are working on this, and we hopefully will be able to be very clear in the next, hopefully few weeks, because I want to be very quick here. But of course, what is important to understand for everybody today is that we are definitely an open continent. All my life, I worked in both public and private sectors, and I'm always make partnerships. It is what is the business about. But in order to make a good partnership, you need to know exactly what you are, where are your strengths, what is your strategy, and then of course invite your partners to go with you. This is exactly what Europe is doing now.
Well, so you know, to put it crudely, if you were to ask the average sort of person in Washington or policymaker in the United States where Europe sort of leads the world, the answer would be regulation. And so there is a suspicion that Europe, you know, is trying to find a strategy to produce national champions or continental champions, I guess, that would compete with big tech from Silicon Valley. Why does Europe lack its own sort of big tech companies? And is more regulation the way you're going to emulate America?
Oh no! I think that's a very fair question, but we have to be very more precise when you mention big tech. In fact, when you mention big tech, you're mainly mentioning roughly the so-called GAFAM. Maybe that's what people have in mind, and it's very clear here. I know, you know, I spent half of my life in the US, so and I really know everything, including, by the way, and I want to say this extremely openly, not naively, but openly and respectfully. I know exactly also the role of, let's say, the Pentagon and in terms of, including, by the way, in semiconductors, and I respect this. I was running companies in the US too. It was always forbidden for me, unfortunately, to be able to bid with many contracts, and I respected it. It was a one way to close, and I respected it. So for us, it's different. We don't have this as, let's say, well established in the US, but we invite our partners with, again, now our own rules. It's not protectionist. It's just to make sure that we will be able to secure what is important to us. Let me give you an example. we were speaking about vaccines. I mean, we had partners and a lot of partners, especially in the US, and suddenly executive order, close the supply chain. We need to make sure that with our partners, including the one who are in the US, we can continue to work without any impact of an executive order. Same thing from the Chinese. We have now, we put a lot of our factories in China. When I was a CEO, I did it also myself. So it was a trend. And then because of the tensions between US and China, which we lost, and that we are another, and we know where we are, by the way. Huh? We know who is our ally. Huh? This is the US, and for decades. So we don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We know exactly who are our allies. And by the way, the Chinese are considered as our systemic rival. But still, because of the tension, close for the semiconductors, then we have a tension in semiconductors. China is spilling stocks. And then we have our supply chains here in Europe, in manufacturing mainly for automotive, which stopped. So we need to make sure, of course, here, even with our partners, that we'll be able to, whoever they are, to secure the supply in certain areas. That's it, not more and not less. Now for the GAFA, the question is, I already was very vocal, I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's true that it has been a fantastic development, the GAFA in the US, mainly because in the US, you have this fantastic large pool of personal data, and it has been made of personal data. So it's not about regulation for me. It's just about now not missing. We missed, that's true, in US, in Europe as a first wave, mainly because we are of course very fragmented still, especially for personal data. Yeah. But now the new wave is in industrial data, and Europe is extremely strong in industrial data, probably the first continent. So my mission, my job is to make sure that we will not miss this wave, and this is what we are trying to do, us, and of course with our allies, and of course with other companies. So we are establishing rules, guidance, and we welcome everybody fulfilling the fact that, especially for data, for example, the laws which will be applied on European data will be European laws, but not from other continents. And you understand.
Okay, I mean, it's a very important topic, and we've just touched on it, but I'm glad you mentioned China, because as you know, you've negotiated an investment deal with China that you concluded shortly before the Biden administration took office, and it caused some irritation. The timing caused, and the fact of it caused some irritation this side of the Atlantic in Washington. And now that deal's got into trouble, partly because of the sanctions you imposed on China, and then China really doubled down and imposed quite harsh sanctions on Europeans. Is this deal now dead?
You know, I will be very honest with you. This deal was not exactly a deal. So that's why, and we all understand. I don't want to comment. I mean, you are a professional journalist. I am a professional in my side, hopefully. So I don't want to comment more than what my body language will say. But what is my body language saying? My body language is saying that it's not a deal. It was more an intention. And it's true that we could decide to do it before or after. It's true that it was exactly in the interim time in the US. It's true also that I understand that probably it was also under the German presidency, and it was probably something. You remember that before the COVID-19 crisis, I think the Chancellor Merkel wanted to have a big meeting, with China in Danzig, and finally it didn't happen. So put this in perspective. At the end of the day, what it is, it was an intention, okay, not more, not less. Now we have, of course, everything that you mentioned in China. European Parliament is on it. So I think that the time when the intention will transform into reality may be pretty long.
Okay, well, I'm glad also that you mentioned the German presidency. 2020, I think I'm right in saying, was the first year where EU trade with China was bigger than EU trade with America. And of course, if you look at the breakdown of that trade, Germany really dominates. I mean, there is a sort of German interest there that exceeds the rest of the other 26 members combined. It's a very lopsided EU-China trade relationship. There is some awareness, again, this side of the Atlantic, that there are divisions of opinion, differences of opinion in Europe about the degree to which the EU should cooperate with the Biden administration on forming a common China strategy. Is that a correct supposition, particularly in advance of, very important German elections, federal elections later this year?
Well, let me tell you for the spirit. The spirit, first I would like to mention that in my portfolio, I will speak more comfortably on my portfolio, which is very large, because it is, again, all industry, companies, digital, defense, space. So I have many, many areas where I want to cooperate and interact much more with the US. And we already do. And I did it, I would like to tell you this, I did it already pretty good with the previous administration, because it's my job. My job is to make sure that we continue to do it whatever happens. And I should here tell you that I have very good relation with my counterpart, and we try to do things positively for both our continent. But of course, I should tell you also that now with the new administration, there is a very strong hope, I should say, that we will continue, we'll be able to increase this even more. And of course, I'm one of those, of course, you could understand that. So we have many, many aspects where I think it's very important to cooperate even more. But as I told you, in my life, I spend my life to make partnerships. This is what is building, I mean, any CEOs who are looking at, and I run many, I mean, not many, but 4 or 5 big companies in my life. You mentioned one of those, but I run others. I teach us also governance and corporate governance at Harvard Business School when I left the government. So I always said, partnership is extremely important, but to be a good partner, you need also to have something to exchange. And this is why you could be certain that you could count, and US could count on us to be a strong partner, a good partner, and the stronger we will be, the better partner we will be. Now, regarding the relation that you mentioned between US and EU versus China, personally, I have been the one who went to find a solution for the 5G and 5G toolbox, and I did it, preserving our interest. I encourage you to look what we did and what I did in order to make sure that we will be able to have clean networks without any, let's say, risky partners or suppliers. So we know how to do it. We will continue to do it our own way, but we know extremely well who are our allies.
Okay, I mean, that's a very, very interesting question. I mean, if you talk to other countries, I mean, not just European, but partners of America around the world, they say when the United States says, please drop Huawei, their response is, sure, we're happy to do that. We're your partner. Who do you have as a substitute for Huawei? And I guess the problem is that Ericsson and Nokia are considerably more expensive. So as a last question, because we're kind of running out of time, but it's a hugely important one. Is there any prospect of a transatlantic Huawei?
No, but first, I mean, I don't speak of any companies in my position. So I will not mention any names, and I never mention any names, except to tell you 2 things. We have now put a tool in place in Europe to make sure that when a company is competing with our European companies, the company, we want to make sure that the company did not benefit from any state support. That's a very strong, and by the way, we announced this, or we increased this even yesterday. So that's a very strong statement to have the first aspect of your question. The second one is that we put very strict restriction in terms of protection, cyber protections. Never mentioning anyone, but just saying, look, if you want to come, like I said at the beginning, if you want to benefit from the internal market, which is the largest market in the world, you're welcome, but here are our conditions. You fulfill the conditions, welcome. You not welcome. And by the way, from some 5G suppliers, including the one you mentioned, they have been considered as high-risk suppliers. So now we have, of course, the two other European companies, Ericsson and Nokia. They hold the largest number of patents in 5G. We want to continue to develop it. By the way, cooperating with US will be a very good idea because, of course, we share the same view, we share the same value. But remember, here also, that's a little bit like the vaccines. The other alternative from Chinese suppliers are coming in 5G from Europe.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting note on which to end a discussion. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm hugely grateful for your time and insights, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, and thank you to be with you.
Thank you.